I don't know, if you'd asked me at 20 how I would see my life progress, it wouldn't have been like this. But if you're actually allowing something to happen, you get to do some amazing stuff.
Off Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. There might be something more to this. These were the thoughts Yvonne Press had while she would enjoy holiday diving from time to time in the early days of her journey. What started as a way to keep up on skills ended up with her progressing through to eventually owning and operating Dark Horizon Diving. Before settling into Malta, where she works in affiliation with Gozo Technical Diving, Yvonne spent time throughout Southeast Asia honing and mastering her craft. It was great to sit down with her and hear more about the early days, the challenges of making a full-time move into the industry, a few love at first breath moments, the walls of Bunaken, becoming a KISS Sidewinder instructor, and much more. Please enjoy. Yvonne, how are you doing this morning?
Good. It's a nice sunny morning, so we're seeing some glimpses of spring, which is always nice. It's kind of been a long winter a little bit. I got lucky, I traveled, but Malta in winter gets colder than you think. So yesterday, for example, Malta had a hailstorm.
Oh,
Luckily, I'm on the neighboring island of Gozo, and we didn't get the sunniest of days, but we certainly didn't get any hail. So it can be different from what you expect.
yeah. No, and to be honest, I'm actually really excited to hear more about Malta. Obviously, I know it exists. I know it's a big diving destination, and I've definitely spoken to a few people that have been or have even lived in the destination. But to be honest, I don't really know much. So I'm really excited to hear more about Malta. But my first question I always like to ask is, tell me about how and why you got into scuba diving. Tell me about that first breath underwater. Was it love at first breath? Was it, I absolutely hate this, I'm never doing this again? Tell me all about it.
It was actually a little bit of both. So it's pretty much completely my friend Oli's fault that I got into diving. We were traveling together after I finished uni, and she was already a certified diver. So she wanted to do her advanced course. And I had a choice between sitting around for 3 days or doing my open water. So I was kind of like, oh, well, we're in Australia, we're on the Great Barrier Reef. Why not sign up for this open water course thing, find out what it's all about? So we did that. We signed up, we paid our dues, and then we went on a trip that included, for me, a free try dive and for her, a free fun dive. And that try dive was not ideal. There was a lot of us, there was not a lot of instruction. And I found this breathing underwater thing, let's just say a little bit weird. So, and the instructor was like, well, we've just got to get going now. I was kind of like, okay. Um, so I survived my try dive, obviously, and then went on to do the open water course. But my poor open water instructor then got this person who was suddenly nervous, who was, when I signed up, I was completely like, oh, yeah, let's just do this. And when I started the course, I was like, yeah, this is going to be 3 tough days. Obviously, that's more than 20 years ago now, and it has changed, but it did take a little bit of time for, not for what I was seeing underwater, but for the whole buoyancy and giving up your control of where we walk, we're like really connected to the ground, and giving that up, I think that took a little bit.
Yeah, no, for sure. And to be honest, those are some of my favorite stories to hear where people get into it and they're just like, and that's why I always ask, was it like, I absolutely hate this moment? Because to see people, they're like, oh, they're not quite sure, but obviously you've made a career out of it. So what pushed you to want to take that next course? Like, was it just some fun dives for years, or was it another friend being like, let's go do this? Like, tell me about that, the next step.
So yeah, the next step kind of took I guess 5 years. For the next 5 years, I was your classic holiday diver, like 5 day dive package, two dives a day, maybe the odd night dive thrown in, that sort of thing. But every time I did that, two things happened. I was kind of thinking, could this be a retirement option? Could this be something that I turn into a second career in, I don't know, 10, 20 years' time? Was the one thought. The other thought was, every time I do this, I have to relearn how to dive. I spent those first 2 days trying to figure it all out again. If you think about it, you have like 50 weeks of a break, and then you're on your diving holiday. You're trying to remember what you did a year ago. So by that time, I was living in Scotland, and I decided to sign up for a dry suit course. The goal was to use Scotland like people use dry ski slopes before they go on a skiing holiday. Just get back into it. Just like, I know I have this warm water holiday coming up in 2 weeks' time. So I'm going to sign up for a couple of dives, try and remember how this thing happens, how I do this, and this will be cool. So two things happened. I did my dry suit course. I wasn't as cold as I thought I would be. And then somebody kept talking about this place on the west coast of Scotland that they went to on dive trips. And I was sort of like, could I sign up for one of those? Yes, they said. But you might want to look into getting your own equipment. I was like, oh, God, I haven't got thousands in the bank account. And then somebody said, oh, just go look on eBay. So I went on eBay just to double check that there wasn't anything suitable, right? Like how we all start shopping, just to check that, we can't get it. And I found an entire set of equipment just outside of town. So I could actually go and look at it and try it on. So I think within 2 weeks, I had done a dry suit course, signed up for a weekend trip, bought a whole set of equipment, one regulator of which I still have. And then I signed up for my dive master training, did that on weekends. And 6 months after I completed that, still in Scotland, I quit my job and got a full-time job as a dive master in Scotland. That's
Oh,
how the slippery slope kind of progressed quite quickly.
it is a very slippery slope. So
Yeah,
throughout that 5 years, did you complete some courses? Like, because you,
yeah.
okay, so like the advanced, the rescue, kind of
So
the
yes,
typical progression.
yeah, yeah. I did what I do. So I did my open water in Australia. I did my advanced in the Red Sea as part of a liveaboard, and then I went to the Canary Islands to Fuerteventura for the rescue. And I think that was already one of those changing moments. And I think it's for many people where you realize that you can do more than look after yourself. You've just sort of taken that step where you can actually look after yourself, but also pay attention what's happening around you and maybe help someone else. And then I waited for the really challenging course for the dive master to do that in cold water in Scotland because why make it easy? Why go somewhere nice and sunny for that? So, but yeah, that all took. I finished my dive master right at the end of 2009. So all of that took about 7 years altogether. Sort of being a holiday diver, doing a little bit more, trying to progress my diving, but also even just staying in it. Because if you're diving once a year, maybe twice a year, it's not that easy to, I think, well, for me, it wasn't that easy to be comfortable enough to really enjoy it. That came with doing more diving.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And it's crazy the amount of, I want to say, local diving that people have around them that they completely just disregard. And I could even say I was the same way when I first got into it, or even before I got into it, because and I know a lot of people will go through this is, I did the try dive in Thailand just on a backpacking trip. I'm like, wow, this is so amazing. I get back to Texas, and in my head, I was thinking, oh, okay, I'll have to wait to go to become certified somewhere else. And then just randomly, I've told the story a couple times, but randomly at a bar at after work one day, just having some drinks, happy hour, telling somebody my story, and they're like, there's diving around here, right? And I was like, really? I mean, obviously there's a big lake, and no, I love that how you just pursued it in your local area, because a lot of people, and I feel like that's when you're ready to take the next step, when you're like, oh, I'm gonna go dive in this cold, not so inviting environment. And then my next question is, so you said you did the dive master course and then got into the industry full time. How was that transition for you? Getting actually like turning a hobby essentially into a job.
So what I was thinking is I'll try and do this gradually, right? So I'd been living in Scotland for a few years by then, and I was sort of thinking, well, let's change job, but not job and location, thinking that that would be the easier way to do it. With hindsight, it probably would have been easier to just go, okay, let's up stick somewhere warm and work somewhere where diving happens 7 days out of seven. But I didn't. So I went and did a year as a dive master, and that year was like really in some ways a good transitional year because I did a lot of things. I spent some time on boats, I spent some time fixing dry suits, I spent some time guiding divers, so that was an interesting one. And then the shop where I had done my dive master came back and said, look, we could do with an instructor 4 days a week, still in Scotland, but you'd have to go do your IDC. Okay, fine. And it'll be maximum 4 days a week. I was kind of thinking, yeah, okay, I could do that. And I could probably moonlight in my previous career in marketing and public relations a little bit, pick up some work here and there just to supplement the income. And that's, I think, the thing if you're working in places like where you're relying on your local diving, it's not that easy to make a living. It's probably not that easy to make a living across this industry in general, but that's a totally different topic. But if you're in places where diving mostly happens on weekends and where a lot of diving is done by divers independently, then it becomes a bit more challenging. But yeah, I stuck that out for about 3 years altogether. And at the beginning of 2014, I left for Asia. And that was then sort of the transition into a bit more warm water diving. But yeah, it's sort of, you know, it changes, but we all go into diving, I think, because we really want to go into diving. So you're looking at some of the things that aren't super smooth and you just accept them. With other jobs, if you're, I don't know, I'm going to say if you're maybe an accountant, I apologize to all accountants who really truly love their jobs, but you may be in that job because it's really well paid and you get amazing benefits. And I think when you go into diving, you're not doing it because it's really well paid, but the benefits, maybe not classic benefits, but there's just plenty of making up for the downsides of it, I guess.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's almost like I don't want to call it a passion project because it's obviously not. It's more than a project, but a passion career, I guess. No, because I definitely agree, and because I was kind of in the same boat. I learned how to dive, started taking classes, really enjoyed it, and in the Central Texas area, obviously not known for diving, there is a thriving diving scene there, but it is pretty hard to make it a full-time living. So what you find, and I think this is pretty common across probably the United States, I'm sure a lot of places in the world, where most of the instructors are, it's their, kind of their part-time job, or there's something they do on the weekends. And it is tough to kind of make it a full-time thing. And that's actually a question that I was going to ask you about, kind of like making it in the industry, because you've done fairly well for yourself. So I, kind of curious to hear about the pathway. But let's talk about you moved to Asia, warm water divings. Tell me about that. I'd love to hear about it.
What happens quite a lot in this industry is I found a job through somebody that I had met in the Red Sea where I did my IDC. So I'd really gone to the Red Sea just to do the IDC with a British course director. He's been mentioned before because I think Scott RG has done his IDC with him as well. So made friends with the dive center there, and the dive center manager in the Red Sea at the time, by that point, had opened his own shop in Bali. And I think that's how this industry goes. We're all kind of semi nomadically moving around. And he was just at the point with his partner where they needed their first full time instructor. And they were sort of like, well, we can promise you you're going to be busy. It's the first time we're hiring somebody full time. So we're all kind of just working it out together. And my criteria at the time were pretty much a long season. And from Malaysia where you are, yeah, you have an off season, but it doesn't stop. It slows down. It doesn't become undivable. So I wanted a long season. I didn't want the pressure of making 12 months worth of money in six. And I didn't want to move every 6 months. And I wanted warm water. My definition of warm at the time was a bit warmer than the Red Sea, which is funny now because Malta is probably very similar temperature to the Red Sea. But anyways, so Bali fit the criteria. So I kind of just went on, well, these people are promising me a job and it fulfills those two things that I need to fulfill. And I went as a recreational instructor. I was already a technical diver at the time, but I hadn't got very much experience. And I just sort of worked for the first year. It was probably the busiest year I have ever worked in the diving industry. And I realized two things. I wanted more technical diving in my life, and I didn't want to work at the same volume. And I know that a lot of people enjoy that really busy, sort of high season style of working, but it's just not what I really enjoy. So moving into technical diving and teaching a lot more one-on-one or one-on-two and actually spending time really developing someone's skills, that's more my thing than introducing as many people as I can to diving. Both of those are perfectly valid career choices. It's just that one of them's mine.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay. So two questions come from that. Um, the move when you first moved there, what were the nerves like? Because obviously it's like, okay, I'm basically moving halfway across the world, all the way across the world. I don't know if you, I mean, obviously you kind of knew the person that gave you the job, but it's like, I don't really know anybody. I don't know if you'd been to the area before. Like what were the nerves? What were you feeling before you made that leap essentially?
So the nerves were probably smaller than you think, but that's because I had done a similar move before. When I was still working in journalism, I got a chance to work for a PBS station in Ohio, of all places, for a year. And I knew nothing about Ohio when I moved to Ohio for a year. I knew that I had a place to live. I knew that I had a place to work and train and develop my skills. And I moved on the basis of that. And I think I did quite a similar thing with Bali. No, I hadn't been to Southeast Asia. No, I hadn't dived the area. I had traveled a little bit in Asia, but in other parts of it. But in a lot of ways, looking back now, I had no clue. But I kind of went like, well, I want to work in diving. This looks like it's going to be a decent job. And maybe sometimes making those decisions like that without too much thinking and just kind of going, look, what's the worst that could happen? If it really doesn't work, I change the return date on my flight and I come back and sort of say, yeah, I'm sorry, can I crash on your couch for a week? While I work out the next step. And it's really funny because I think as I'm sort of in the industry a bit longer, I'm planning more. And I am German, so the German in me loves to plan. But every so often, it's also just a decision of, yeah, the boxes are ticked, let's go. So, and you've got to sort of, you've maybe got to sometimes make decisions like that. Or I think it's not the worst thing to make decisions where you don't know exactly what's going to happen, because in reality you never quite know. So you can do all your research, you can spend hours, I could have spent hours, and I did spend obviously some time on Google figuring out things about Bali, but I didn't join all the Facebook groups. I didn't try and read up everything that I could have read up. I just kind of went and took it from there.
No, no, I love that answer. Just because I always yeah, I love that answer because I tell people if you think about it too much, you're never gonna you're gonna think yourself out of the situation, right? And especially if you almost do too much research on, I love the internet, love everybody has a love hate relationship with the internet, but you'll hear all the wonderful things. But along with all the wonderful things, you'll hear all the reasons why you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And it's just, you gotta just yeah, take that leap. And then my next question that I wanted to ask you is, tell me about your pathway into technical diving. Did you do that before you became an instructor? Was it just kind of the natural progression that a lot of people will go through? What appealed to you to go down longer, to go down deeper, stay longer? What was the appeal?
So I was only just an instructor when I took that step. I was in Scotland, and what was happening is off the east coast of Scotland, companies looking to establish wind farms were doing surveys of the sea bottom. Now, if you're going to build a marine wind farm, apparently you need a really, really flat bottom. So what they also found, the survey results they had where there was like a bump or something in that bottom, they decided obviously not suitable for marine wind farms, but a couple of boat charter companies purchased some of those results and started diving the bumps. And a lot of those bumps actually turned out to be World War One, World War Two wrecks. And some of them, this is about 2010, 2011. Some of those wrecks were in this area of 40 to 60 meters. So they're so close, but so far. You know, if you're a recreational diver and you've done your deep specialty, so there you are with your 40 meters, you're not allowed to do any deco, but you're a bit like, there's a wreck in 45. Come on. So I got a chance to, I pretty much had two choices. I could go down the Paddy route and I could go down the Bizak route, which is the sub-aqua club in the British Isles. Actually, in Scotland, it's called Scotsack, but same, same. Now, I ended up going the Paddy route just because it was a bit more straightforward with finding dates and arranging dives and all of that. Did the training specifically to have a chance to dive those wrecks. Never ended up diving them, simply because on the days they would be dived on the weekends, I was teaching recreational. So yeah, it's classic. But it got me into this kind of diving. And then when I moved to Asia, it was purely for a recreational job. But I went on holiday to Bunaken, where you've been and you've seen the walls, and I did some tech diving there. I was sort of like, yeah, no, I need to have more of this. So, and the only way I'm going to get more as an instructor is if I train more and try and become good enough to actually be able to teach this. So that's how I went from wanting to dive those wrecks that I still haven't dived. They remain on the list, but the list keeps getting longer. So to teaching recreationally and going, yeah, no, I want this other kind of diving. And I ended up going to Thailand, of all places, to complete my tech instructor training because the instructor trainer was recommended by a friend. And I think that's how a lot of things work. You sort of, somebody mentioned somebody, maybe now we're doing more of looking people up online. And I know I do things where I say to people when they send me lots of questions, look, do you want to jump on a call? Because I can sit here and answer all your questions, but they'll just lead to more questions. Whereas if we jump on a call, we can actually talk and we get a better idea of whether this works. But yeah, so I made it to Asia in 2014 and spent a year working for the dive center. And then when that contract ran out, I decided rather than looking for another job, I'm going to go and train to be a tech instructor. So I did that. There's always something. So I'm going to call it a carrot. I know that sounds really terrible, but there's something more to learn. It's not so much oh, I can go for this certification. It's more like, but if I complete this course, I can go and see that. And that's kind of how it went. So if I look at those walls in Bunaken, for example, I know a lot of people look at them in 12, 15 meters and go like, wow, it's so pretty. There's so much to see. There's turtles everywhere. But I'm the person that looks down and goes like, ooh, I wonder what might be there. And, you know, then you've got to get the training to go there if you want to do it somewhat safely.
Oh yeah, no, oh man, I have so many questions now. Because no, I absolutely love Bunaken. So I spent the first time I went there was actually almost not by accident, but I was traveling through Indonesia and I was at Lembe because that was recommended to me before I left the state. Someone's like, "You have to go to Lembe. It's such a wild place." And I was in Lembe, and basically, I think it was like a week left in Indonesia before my flight was going to fly out of Bali and in Lembe. And then someone told me about Bunaken, and I literally had the flight to Bali or it was Bunaken. And they're like, you have to go to Bunaken, like you have to go. And literally, the last minute, I was like, okay, I just emailed the shop. Two fish divers, and it was like, hey, do you have any availability? They're like, yeah, come on over. I think I ended up staying like 4 or 5 days, and I swear that like changed my course because I absolutely fell in love with Bunaken. I mean, the vibe there is just right up my alley, just a super mellow island. Like everybody's just walking around playing music. I mean, they're not literally walking around playing music, but they pretty much are. And I just too much palm wine. um, but yeah, I absolutely fell in love with it. And the diving is phenomenal. And it does get a little bit crowded, but it's not like, certain places that you're popping up and you're seeing like literally 30, 40, maybe 50 boats. It's like there's a few boats. And yeah, I ended up going back there and doing my dive master course just because I was like, man, I want to live on this island and I ended up staying, I think it was about 6, maybe almost 8 weeks by the time I left. But tell me about your time in Bunaken. I'm just curious. So, was it like a short stay, a long stay?
It was both. There were two. Actually, there's been more since then. So basically, that first year that I worked in Bali, I was on a working visa that was a single entry, which meant that I needed to spend my 2 weeks holiday inside Indonesia. I could fly out of Bali, but I couldn't fly out of Indonesia without voiding that visa. And I looked for technical diving in Indonesia, which brought me, small world, to two fish divers in Bunaken. So yeah, see, that's where the slope got a lot more slippery. Um, so I went there. When was this? Early 2015 for just a week's holiday. I was going to do my Tech 50 just to round out this initial series of PADI qualifications and did that. And the instructor kept going on about something called side mount. So we did the Tech 50, and he was like, "Oh, come on, just do a trial in the pool. Come on, just what have you got to lose? What are you doing this afternoon, anyways?" So I was like, "Fine, fine, fine." So jumped onto side mount in the pool, and now that was love at first breath. I was like, "Oh my god, this is really convenient." So what do I do rather than having a holiday? I had a side mount course, did a TDI side mount course, and really that sort of week, 10 days or whatever that was, sort of cemented this, yeah, no, I need to do more of that. And that's what made the decision to then go into training towards becoming a technical instructor. And obviously, it takes a bit of dedication and a lot of time on the water to go from I've just finished my Tech 50 to I can actually perform these skills to a level where I can teach them. But luckily, I found a shop in Thailand that would give me the flexibility to almost train in modules and then do some teaching so that I could support myself because there wasn't a magic bank account that financed all of this. So I kind of ended up doing one module of tech instructor training, next level of sort of my own technical diving qualifications. And I don't know if you can see this behind me, but I kind of got into cave diving by accident because Thailand, in order to dive truly deep, to dive to hypoxic depths, you need to do it in the beginnings, in the beginning shafts of cave systems. So you needed a certain level of cave qualifications in order to do the hypoxic open circuit diving. And I ended up getting into cave diving, sort of similar to how I got into diving. I had to do it to do the deep stuff. And I was like, oh, wow, hello, yes, awesome. There's more to see here. So you see, sometimes you've just got to sort of allow things to develop a little bit rather than try and plan them out too much. This doesn't apply to dive planning, just for the record. Dive planning is necessary, but I don't know, if you'd asked me at 20 how I would see my life progress, it wouldn't have been like this. But if you're actually allowing some things to happen, you get to do some amazing stuff. We're asking about Bunaken, so complete sidetrack. Now, I stayed in Thailand for the best part of a year, and then two fish divers came back and asked whether I wanted to come and take the tech department in Bunaken and almost pack it up and move it from Bunaken to Bali. Why to Bali? Simply because if you are teaching, you're relying on people being able to get to you easily. And Manado still doesn't have a lot of international flights. Now, if you know that you were told by your friends that Lembe is amazing, and then when you're in Lembe, you might as well go to Bunaken. But if you're thinking of going somewhere to do a course, then most likely the destination that's easier to get to is going to win over the destination that takes another two flights to plan. So I ended up joining Two Fish for 6 months on Bunaken to figure out whether we sort of gelled, whether we worked together well, but also to kind of start thinking about how we're going to wrap up tech in Bunaken or leave a little bit of a satellite operation there, but move the main teaching base to Bali. So that's how I got to spend, I think, about 2 weeks on holiday there, and then ended up living there for 6 months. Um, so to answer your question from about 10 minutes ago, it was both a short stay and a long stay.
Oh, no, I feel like that's what happens. You go for a short stay and then it just kind of keeps you there, which is another reason why I love that place so much, just because yeah, you never want to leave. And I'm long overdue from visiting again. It's been a while. I haven't been back there since 2019. But a question on, so obviously I do know that you're a pretty big advocate for the side mount. So it's kind of cool to learn how you learned the side mount. When you were going through your technical courses, your training, were you doing that in a back mount configuration or were you doing that in a side mount configuration?
So I started in a back mount configuration because that was kind of, to be honest, I didn't even know about side mount at that point. That's like 2010, 2011 in Scotland, and maybe it was available, but it wasn't on my radar. Twin sets were what people were diving when they were going deep, and there was the odd person in a rebreather, but that seemed such a big step from being a recreational, even instructor. There wasn't much talking about it, or maybe I just didn't see it because you sort of, once you start looking into something, you suddenly see it everywhere. But it was twin set or twin set. By the time I did that side mount trial, I'd seen more about side mount. I'd seen people use it in caves. I'd heard about it. It looked interesting, and it was just like, yeah, I just want to try it. I just want to see what it's all about. And the training then was quite intense because the instructor suggested doing the TDI side mount version, and TDI side mount trains you, I'm hoping to quote this right now, to the level you're already qualified to dive in. That means I kind of went from 0 to 4 tanks in a reasonably limited amount of time. It also meant that after that course, I had to take quite a bit of a step back to kind of actually perfect, but fine tune my two tank configuration and build it back up to 3 and 4s, just because that course was really like a license to practice, because we packed so much into the few days that we had that it was just like, yeah, okay, so now you have all of this information, go get your own equipment, or at least equipment that you can use fairly permanently, and then take it from there and really start almost building backwards again. So, and since then, I've loved side mount for the flexibility, for the configurability, and then being back in Bali a few years later, had a chance to do some exploration in Lombok. And the first time we went into Lombok, nobody had twin sets there. So the only way you were going to do any decompression diving was in side mount configuration, because you could just use any tank. Yes, it's much better if you have dedicated valves and properly set up side mount equipment. But if all you can get is single tanks, then you can make that happen in side mount and you can start exploring a bit. So that course or that pool trial has a lot to answer for. So in hindsight, and there's the idea of carrying your tanks to the sea. There's also with Bali sometimes you get waves, and I just find it easier to carry out two tanks at a time that I can almost use to lean on when I'm walking up a beach, rather than having a twin set on my back and then you have a big wave that pushes you from behind, and now you're dealing with something that's harder. But that's not saying that twin sets haven't got their place. You're on a big boat in big waves, standing on a diving platform waiting to get ready. Twin set might be the easier thing to stand in.
Yeah. No, for sure. I went down the side mount route. I don't know, maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. 2 years ago, I swear these years just keep flying by. No, because I've almost been out here for 2 years, so about 3 years ago. And I enjoyed it. We had a lot of steps getting to the water, and it was just either lugging two tanks on your back down, two flights of stairs, or either one tank at a time. And I found it to be quite easier. And then I actually recently just got back into back mount doubles towards the end of last year. And I've heard it 100 times before, and I know it. It's the right tool for the job. I completely get that. And so I'm just trying to build up all my skill sets. But my next question that I wanted to ask you is the caves. So you started getting, it's funny because the way that you were describing it is, it's almost exactly like the carrot. Like, oh, I have to do this to get to this. It's like you're just, constantly looking for chasing the carrot. How did you find when you first started doing the caves in Thailand? I have not been to them. I'm actually not cave certified. Hopefully that changes this year. How did you find the caves in Thailand? And then there's obviously quite a growing cave scene in the Indonesia area. And I want to say, is there caves in Malta? Am I correct in that assumption or no?
How do I say this? They're probably more cavern like than cave like. So, what you have in Thailand, what you have in Indonesia, what you have in Mexico are some really complex, almost labyrinth like caves where there's lots of areas that fork off one way or another. What you have in Malta and Gozo is these overhead environments where you go in and you go out. There are some that are bigger and that are so big that you can set them up to have the navigational decisions that you need to make in more complex caves. And it's a good place to start to do a cavern course, or possibly even an intro to cave. But then if you're looking at truly complex navigation where you can't turn around and see any light, or where it isn't clear that if you went in this way, you have to come out that way, then I think you're looking at places like Spain, or you're looking at Mexico, or you're looking at Thailand. Now, in Thailand, those caves were big enough for back mount. So there was no real, but by the time I got there, I was a side mount diver, but we did the initial courses in twin sets. And to be honest, I was definitely not enough of a side mount diver when I arrived in Thailand to really think about adding complications like not just handling the cave, but remember I sort of completed my cavern and intro to cave in order to do hypoxic trimix dives. So now you're looking at altogether 5 tanks. And I would still say to this day, side mount beyond 4 tanks is starting to become a bit of a question of what you're doing with all the space. I don't know if you've ever tried it. I've tried out of just for fun to put 6 tanks around my front. Um, it is physically possible, is the good news, but it feels like a suit of armor. It feels like something that you would expect to see in Game of Thrones. You cannot move anymore. And then is really the question, okay, what are we gaining by using side mount? Or are we just pushing a configuration because that's your favorite configuration? And all of those can be valid reasons to do that. But in some ways. So I did my initial cave training all in back mount. When I then refreshed my cave skills, and I did that in Sulawesi, which I think you've talked to some of the guys about as well. That was all in side mount, and some of the caves we dived there, they were truly, truly side mount caves. So could you have forced a twin set through there? Possibly, but then you're starting to look at actually damaging things, and why would you do that? And it then becomes just not the right configuration for the place. So yeah, it's I have a really soft spot for side mount. I just find it suits me better with handling tanks in a lot of ways. But that doesn't mean that I don't still teach in twin sets. So I still go between the two, which means that every so often you just kind of need to make sure that you're keeping your skills fresh in both. And that's the same, I think, for all configurations. Or if you're, if you spend your time teaching open water course after open water course after open water course, and suddenly you have somebody who wants to take a rec specialty, well, you might need to practice your line laying, because if you haven't done that for a year, then how good are you going to be at that?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's just reasons to go diving, really.
Very true. Very, very true. So you became an instructor. Well, I guess I kind of like, I just so many questions. Sorry.
Sorry, I'll try to answer a bit shorter.
No. Totally. I loved it. I love it when I have more questions than sometimes it's like, I need to find a question. So you became a technical instructor, and did you at that point, did you know that you kind of wanted to branch out on your own, hence Dark Horizon Diving?
So I don't think I knew that immediately. When I did the training in Thailand, initially the plan was that I would start working for my instructor trainer and sort of starting to teach the basic level courses whilst assisting him on higher level courses, and kind of just building things gradually. And that worked out initially. He then had an accident and sustained a life changing head injury. And literally that same week, Two Fish came and asked if I wanted to take up this opportunity in Indonesia. And just with the way things were developing in Thailand, I was sort of thinking, you know what? Indonesia looks like a massive step and a massive task, and also a massive thing to take on when you're quite a green tech instructor, which, I was. I'd been at that level for less than a year. So, but I said yes to it and went back to Indonesia. And I stayed with Two Fish altogether for nearly 4 years. And we built up Amit to quite a sort of, I would say, quite a thriving tech center. We sort of, if you want to look at it from an accountant's point of view or from the numbers point of view, we doubled certifications 2 years in a row, 2 years sort of after each other. But during that time, I started feeling like I was sort of the only tech person with a couple of other people doing tech within a really big, successful recreational center. And that means that you're sometimes just that little goldfish in a pond of carp. And every time something's decided for the whole company, you kind of go like and say, I need something else. And also at the same time, it became possible to set up, I had an opportunity to set up on my own. And I think that's when I was kind of like, you know what, I'm going to try and build this relatively small boutique-ish dive center that's focused on what I call tech and related courses. So things like side mount, things like intro to tech, which is really not so much about going deep, but about changing your skill level. And also some of the deeper courses, and look into rebreather training and do all of that, but do it focused and add things like solo diver courses, because people interested in that sort of diving, that sort of goes together. Why not recreational? Because where I was in the northeast of Bali, there were about 70 dive centers offering recreational diving. I did not need to be the 71st. Now, all of that was a really great idea, and it started off super well. Unfortunately, timing wasn't on my side. I had my first client officially in September 2019, and we all know what happened about 6 months later. So it was enough to prove that I liked working sort of quite independently, but also, so COVID shut everything down like it did worldwide. And over the next couple of years, a few things happened, especially family wise, that meant that I needed to be a little bit closer to Europe. I'm originally from Germany, and sometimes you hear that, sometimes you don't. But so my mum was in Germany and had a couple of health scares, and I was sort of like, you know what? Especially during COVID, I'm 2 days of travel away. But even if flights and everything work well, you're 24 hours away pretty much when you're based in Indonesia. And I was kind of thinking, I don't need to live next door, but I also want to be closer than that. So I ended up just moving to Malta, and I went and checked that out. So that wasn't a move on a wing and a prayer. You see, planning can happen, checking things out can happen. I came to visit it, to look at it, and sort of just see, is this a place that I can imagine living? And then at the end of 2022, I sort of just packed up in Indonesia and moved a lot of diving equipment and myself back towards Europe, but also gave myself 2 months in Mexico because that had been something I'd wanted to do for ages. And it just seemed, if I was making this big, crazy move, then I could as well have that 2 months in between just to really, really focus on cave diving, because that had been a bit of a few and far between. And it's not, I don't know, I think if you want to stay in cave diving, it's like a motor skill. So if you don't practice it regularly, you lose those skills and they're not coming back. So yeah, that's how kind of the whole thing from Scotland, Northern Europe via Asia. That's how I ended up in Southern Europe about just a little bit under a year ago now.
Okay, okay. So, I feel like I'm just lining my questions up now. Sorry. uh, when you decided to go off on your own, there had to have been, the back to kind of like the nervous questions, like how are, because take for example, like me and my podcast, I'm like trying to kind of build it up a little bit more this year. It's one of my goals. I'm trying to get back into teaching, trying to do the independent thing. So as for somebody that's done it, I don't want to say what advice can you give to me, but like what nerves did you have kind of going into that? Was it another kind of leap, or was it just kind of, I feel ready to do this, so I'm comfortable moving into this, so it feels natural to do this? Or was it, what the hell am I doing? Am I making the right decision?
It's a little bit of both. And I think there's always, depending on how the day's going, that still continues. So, where you're saying, oh, yeah, I love to be able to decide how I'm going to structure the day and how I will do this for that student. And so I like that, but there are also things that are a benefit of being a part of a dive center, like having chance to bounce ideas off somebody else or run them by somebody else. And I think whenever you're doing something independently, then that's maybe a little bit what's missing, finding that sounding board. I'm quite lucky now in Malta. The way you work here is that you're either employed or part of a dive center, or even if you work more or less independently, you have to be affiliated with a dive center. So you're not completely out on your own. So it's a little bit getting the best of both worlds. If I was employed, then, there would be things like a monthly salary. So I don't have that. But because of the affiliation, I have the sounding board. I can sort of go and say, hey, what about this dive site? And especially when I came here last year, March, and I'd been the year before to check it out, but all I'd done was like a handful of dives because it was part of a family holiday and I sort of had the odd day away. But the team at the dive center that I'm affiliated with now, Gozo Technical Diving, were so kind at just going like, well, you drive and we show you the dive site sort of thing, so that you get to learn what's what, and we'll all figure it out together. So, what advice would I have? Probably sort of follow your instincts. Don't not take advice, but also think about what people are saying and what you truly want to do, because you'll know best where you see your podcast going. That doesn't mean that other people won't have good ideas, but don't get sidetracked too much by them, and uh, take the good days with the challenging ones. There will be days where you're sort of like, why am I doing this by myself? Why don't I have a co host so that it can be, I don't know, maybe more of a sort of two people thing, but just keep doing it. I haven't got a secret recipe. If I have a secret recipe, I promise I will turn it into a podcast or something like that, and it'll be sold for thousands of dollars.
Awesome, awesome. And then you kind of started going into my next question I wanted to ask is Malta. So why Malta?
Yes.
What brought you, or obviously you'd visited, you checked it out. What was the appeal? And tell me about Malta, the diving, the scene. I mean, I know you've kind of explained some of it already, but I'm curious to know more.
So I wanted somewhere that, if you look at the diving I had in Bali, both for myself but also for teaching, it was very, very convenient because there's lots of shore diving, there's easy access to depth, and I was kind of thinking those are things that I want, both for teaching but also for my own diving, for my own like sharpening of skills or keeping them fresh. And that's what Malta and Gozo have. There's a lot of dive sites that you can literally just park up by the roadside, get ready, and walk in, and have a recreational dive or a technical dive, depending on how you choose to plan your dive and which way you're going. But there's also a lot of really amazing wreck diving here. So where Malta sits in the Mediterranean, it's been a staging post, or sort of it's been a strategic location for so many people, really going back to the Phoenicians. There's been life on these islands for 7,000 years. And there's been shipwrecks that are World War I, World War II, but there's also stuff that is far older than that that's being found and that's being protected by an organization called Heritage Malta. And then on the other side, you have shipwrecks that were deliberately sunk for training. So you've got topography, you've got enough cave to keep line laying skills fresh, you've got easy access to the dive sites. It's almost year round. It becomes a bit unpredictable in winter. So when the weather gets a little bit more stormy, then if you said, okay, I'm coming for a week of diving in December, then you may get lucky and you're diving the entire week with flat, calm seas, or you may get unlucky and you're getting 2 days of diving because it becomes rough on the other days. Aside from that, it's just got a nice lifestyle. So it's relaxed, but there's plenty of stuff going on. We went to a carnival procession last night, and you see a tiny island like Gozo that, just has a few thousand residents. But there's so many dance groups and so many people trying to keep traditions alive, and there's like specific local foods being sold. So there's so much else that makes it a nice place to live. So, yeah, I mean, if you look at my last year, I focused a lot on becoming a KISS Sidewinder instructor, but that involved a lot of travel. So, Malta is also a good location. If you're based here too, just get to pretty much anywhere within Europe, anywhere within, or even outside of Europe. It's a good sort of base from which to explore other places. So, diving wise, really cool topography, wrecks, both deliberately sunk and truly historic, shore access. There are some dives that are boat dive only, but there's just so much possibility if what you want to do with your life is diving. But there's also a really nice sort of Mediterranean vibe and lifestyle to it. So yes, for all of the above reasons, and it's warmer than Scotland or Germany, so that might have also played a role in the decision.
So you mentioned the KISS Sidewinder. Did you just become an instructor, or tell me about your progression into the KISS Sidewinder or rebreathers in general?
The KISS Sidewinder was another love at first breath, and that was definitely a COVID win. So I'd become a rebreather diver on the AP Inspiration, the yellow box, in 2016, and found a unit in Bali, dived it, loved the no bubbles, loved the time, loved all of that. But I started looking at the Sidewinder sort of about maybe 2018, 19. I was kind of like, it looks intriguing. And then in, I think 2021, yeah, and right in the middle of COVID, I had a chance to either try or do a crossover. And I was talking to the instructor, and he said, well, look, we're in the middle of COVID. We all have more time than anything else. So this is the price for a tryout. This is the price for a crossover. And I was like, let's do the crossover because, it's, I have the time. I have the time. We'll figure out the money later. So I did the tryout, and it was just being in the water in my side mount configuration, only without the bubbles. You are looking at rebreather diving, aren't you?
Yes.
And what happens with a lot of big rebreathers is that the change in buoyancy and balance is so big because of the rebreather's design that you almost have to relearn how to dive without like expanding this into an hour-long sermon because of how the sidewinder is designed, because of where the counterlungs are. That just doesn't happen. So it's literally your side mount configuration as you know it, with a few bits added to it. That is how it feels to dive. Yes, there's more to learn. I'm not trying to say there's nothing to learn at all, but that was just such an eye opener. And one of the things I had liked about side mount in general is that I found it easier to enter the water and exit the water. So again, suddenly I didn't have a 25 kilo rebreather on my back, but I had 8 to 10 kilos, depending on weights, on my back, and a couple of side mount tanks that I was walking into the water. So I was like, oh, this is easy. And it travels so well. So, long story short, I did the crossover. I got an opportunity to buy the unit of my instructor. And then at the end of, no, the beginning of last year, beginning of 2023, I was in Mexico, and the path to becoming a Sidewinder instructor is quite long. You have to assist courses, you have to do an instructor evaluation, and you have to teach under supervision, even if you're already a rebreather instructor, which I was at the time. But I was like, look, I'm going to do this assist, this first one, and I'm going to see where I'm at. Where am I? Where should I be? And two things happened without putting too fine a point on it. I got my backside handed to me. But I was also shown a pretty clear path. It was pretty clear what I needed to do to get there. So I spent the last year working on it, doing the other assists, and I literally finished my teaching under supervision at 7 p.m. on New Year's Eve.
Awesome. That's a great,
Well,
great
that's a good
present.
way to end the year.
You know what though? The courses like that where they're really tough, like you go in, you're like, oh, where am I at? And you kind of get a rude awakening in a sense. Like sometimes I don't I guess it depends on how the course, or not how the course goes, but uh how it's presented, right? If it's like, okay, this is really challenging. Sometimes I love those courses so much because, like you said, you had a clear path. You knew where you needed to go. You didn't just give up. And I think that's huge because then once you reach that point, it's almost that much more gratifying because you're like, I was down here, now I'm up here. This is an amazing feeling. So that's awesome. So you're currently teaching on the Sidewinder. Any other units?
I'm still teaching on the AP Inspiration, but it's sort of taken a bit of a step back. I think there's just so much innovation coming out of the sort of KISS and X Deep side of things, and that rebreather is being developed so much that it's really, really not just getting a lot of interest because of advertising, but because of its versatility. I don't know if you've seen pictures of the back mount version, but that could be a bit of a game changer for some of the dives that we have here when it gets wavy. Because if you imagine having your single tank on your back with the bits that form the rebreather, but not a massive rebreather, so it's a single tank with a couple of add-ons really. And yes, you can do an entry through waves because you're carrying a single tank and 2-3 kilos more. So it's not this, it doesn't become such a big challenging step. So I think that's a rebreather that's really got a lot of future. Whereas if you look at the AP Inspiration, it's got all the heritage. It's one of the first rebreathers that was available sort of commercially to buy. And I've done some amazing dives on it. So don't get me wrong, it's just that my heart beats a little bit more for side mount than it does for big back mount things, if we're truly honest about this. So I teach on the unit now. I'm actually just off to Croatia at the beginning of March to teach a course. So, it's just one of those rebreathers that I think can make rebreather diving more accessible to people that are thinking, oh no, it's too much of a step, it's too much this, too much that. It travels so nicely. And I took it the year after I bought mine. I actually ended up using it as a safety diver working with the film crew. So it's so versatile considering how small it looks that, yeah, it's just kind of, it's taken over my life a little bit. But, in a good way.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, no, I look forward to seeing what they're going to be doing in the future because I know I've seen footage, video, some presentations on the Sidewinder 2, some of the other stuff that they're doing. So it's going to be quite exciting to see what they have. So my final question for you before I let you go is I feel like I want so many different advice questions, but I'll go down this route. Somebody that is looking into getting into side mount diving, what is the best piece of advice you could give to that person? Because I know when I first got into it, it was a little challenging. I just kind of jumped into it. I literally went to Mexico, saw a side mount diver, was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. I want to do it. That was kind of my reasoning. I know everyone has their different reasons, but what is the best piece of advice that you could give to somebody that is looking to get into that configuration?
Find an instructor that side mount dives. There are a lot of people who become side mount instructors because it's part of a package, and I'm not saying they're all bad, that's not right. But with side mount, the devil's a little bit in the details. So it's understanding how to set up different kinds of tanks, how to set up different harnesses, and spending the time. And if your instructor does that maybe once a year or not that much, then they're unlikely to have all that insight and all that knowledge that you might be looking for. So find somebody that actually dives and loves side mount and loves to tinker with the equipment, even, after your course, and take that course as the beginning. I think it's challenging to be a side mount diver without your own equipment because it is so personal, and because 2 centimeters on that bungee here and an inch of webbing there make a big difference. But that doesn't mean that you can't go through the initial course and actually figure out whether you like it. But be prepared to do some fine tuning afterwards. And then be prepared to refine tune again when you're changing location. So for me, moving from Asia, where everything is aluminium tanks, to Malta, where there's some aluminium, some steel, and then you start realizing that a steel tank is not the same as another steel tank because they come in slightly different weights, and some have a round bottom, some have a concave bottom. All of that influences everything you do. So just be prepared for to put that little bit of time in. Can you dive with a less than perfect tank? Yes, you can. But if you can get it right, it just is so much more comfortable. So train with somebody that dives and loves side mount, and then be prepared to tinker for a while. It's just part of the journey.
I love it. I love it. Actually, it kind of I you said something earlier, which I think kind of really applies to that. Is it just gives you a license to practice?
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's absolutely amazing. Awesome. Well, I really, really want to thank you for coming onto the podcast. This has been absolutely amazing. You've got me wanting to go check out the caves in Thailand. You got me wanting to go to Malta. hop on a Sidewinder. There's just so many different things I want to do now. That's the love-hate relationship about this podcast. Sometimes I get to talk to a lot of different people and I'm like, man, I want to go do that now. So this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you very, very much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Off-gassing, a scuba podcast.